Welcome, Illumineers. It is time to take a rest from your quest and check in at the Lorekeeper's Inn. I'm your host, Katie. As some of you may have seen, this last weekend was the Disney Lorcana Challenge in Chicago. So today we are headed to the game room of the Lorekeeper's Inn, and we're going to have some tournament talk. With us today, we have two very talented players, and we're going to discuss what we were happy to see, what we were surprised to see, and what we hope to see as the competitive play keeps moving along with these newest Ursula return cards. So, without further ado, our first guest today holds the world's record, maybe unofficial, I don't know if they've done their annual check on it, but she's made the most friendship bracelets for the Disney Lorcana community. While she's not making beautiful bracelets, you will find her building new decks, brewing up cosplays, and also reminding us computer gremlins to take a break and stretch and take care of our body using her wonderful videos about stretching and building strength. So, welcome, Cass.
Hi, sorry if you've got little snippets from my children in the background there.
They're part of it, and that's okay, you know?
And I don't think I've made the most bracelets. I think there's definitely other ladies in the Lorcana community that have made more than me. I just made a bunch of like 3 days.
Okay, well then I'll give you the most per short period of time.
Okay, fair.
I'm allowed to give that out on this show, I think. So in addition to Cass, we're also joined by the queen of homebrewed decks, who use the element of surprise and perdita fossa, which might not be a word you know, but you'll know probably by the end of this, to blow away the competition during the set championships. We might all see a meta. She sees an opportunity to make waves using cards in new and exciting ways. So welcome, Lindsey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate that.
No, I love it. I love seeing your stuff on Twitter. I love seeing that you always, people see the metas as like a recipe, and you kind of see it as like inspiration, You see it as something to build against, build around, and I think that's very fun.
Absolutely. Every time I hear someone say, "Oh, the meta's solved," I say, "Hang on, give me a second," and I get to and I'm like, "Wait, I can break it."
I know, and I think the set championships, or not set championships, the DLC down in Atlanta really proved that a scientist in the homebrew field can really craft their way right through it all. So before we kind of go into the top 4 or so and our favorites, I kind of wanted to take a moment to just even look at the bracket, because there are some things that were really surprising to me. And, as you look through some of these brackets, one thing will be glaringly clear is not a lot of amber. In general, I went through and noticed that there was, I think, a total of 6. Here we go. 6 total amber decks that had amber in it, which I thought was bananas as an Amber Steel Song fan. And I know you were a Mufasa fan, which is amber. So why do you think that is? Why do you think amber kind of went away this time?
I guess I could start here. As amber is my absolute favorite ink. I've loved it since set 1, but it is, to me, the ink that I think in set 1 it really was the strongest. We saw Steel Song become like its thing. It had these big characters like Surfer Stitch, and we all know back then Rapunzel was the card draw. But as the sets have gone on, well, Amber has gotten a few things. In set 2, it was really the Queen Shift, and then we got Mufasa, and that kind of started some things, but it just hasn't quite gotten the power that it's needed to keep up, in my opinion. And I think set 4 was its worst. Outside of Mufasa decks getting Gaston and Julieta for a little more card drop, that is really it. Steel Song didn't get any new real amber cards to play with to give them more power. They got the Ursula Singer 4 on turn 2, but we've seen those Sisus pop up that can just kill it instantly with its low strength. So I just think that amber hasn't kept up. And my biggest wish, fingers crossed, for set 5 is that amber finally gets some bangers. Gets some really good card draw, and get some engines going, because it just cannot keep up with the Hiram engines, the bounce packages, the Bucky. It needs something. It needs a push.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think my Christmas wish is that somehow we get the Rockstar Stitch, that card draw engine mixed with the heroes. It sounds really hard. I don't think the science is behind it quite yet, but there was so much good synergy in set 1 that it's just been so hard to get that back, where you're laying down a card, and then you're like, guess what? I'll never stop. And your board has like 20 people, and it's not that way anymore, and it's been very depressing. Um, I know, Cass, what decks are you? Do you have a ink that you're like that's my color? That's the one I go to.
Last set I was actually playing Emerald Ruby Evasive, but this set I'm kind of thinking I'm gonna go Emerald Amethyst just to do an Ursula and Eels deck because I did do the whole cosplay thing, like gotta be themed, right?
Exactly. It's good. Yes, it adds part of it. Yeah, I mean, Emerald is, I would call it the belle of the ball. The prettiest girl at the party was Emerald. And like every prettiest girl at the party, it was, she didn't go home. Well, she actually, okay, well, spoiler alert, Emerald still did win, but not in the way that I thought it would. Looking at like the brackets, I don't know. The way people were talking about it, it made me feel like I was gonna look at the top 32 decks and be like, oh, it's all Diablos all the way down. And that didn't happen, which is probably good for people who don't like Diablo. Were you guys surprised that Diablo didn't necessarily blow everyone away? Oh, Bucky. I think that was the other one. They're like, ban Bucky.
Yes.
I wasn't surprised, I think, as others. I thought there would be a little bit more even of a split between the top 4 decks, which I guess would be the 2 item decks, the Ruby one and the Steel one, and then Ruby Amethyst has obviously come back into favor, and then the Bucky deck. But I mean, Bucky was the second most popular in the top 64, but as I watched the brackets go down each one, a lot of Buckies got knocked out, and I think everybody was teching for the Buckies.
I know.
Which left a lot more room for the item decks to get in and the Flynn Ruby Amethysts to really show their power. I think they did really well into the item decks, and that's why we saw so many of them making it into the higher than the Bucky. But a really good Bucky pilot ended up winning it, and that does say a lot for the deck and the pilot. But there's ways around it, and I think people do over exaggerate a little. It's not fun to play against. Yep. I agree with that 100%. And maybe Lorcana should look into that if we get more good 3-drop Floodborns, but there's ways around it. We're figuring it out.
That's always the downside of having a card that everybody's hyped about, is then it becomes like public enemy number 1. Everyone's like, how do I tap him down? How do I board wipe as quick as possible? Or, something that just steals 1 across the board. It was fun seeing Big Tink have some popularity, I think, almost for that reason, because for a while she wasn't everywhere, but now she's there, and I hope she's there forever. Big Tink's one of my favorite pet cards. So we can talk about the top 4. I don't think we'll save that for last, but before we did, I also pulled up some decks that I know that we were like, wow, look at that. And I'll start with one that for me I'm particularly fond of because I did some coaching with this individual. We are talking about the one, the only, the GOAT, Zach Bivens. And he did Steel Song, and it's so hard not to be excited about that. I heard a yes from you, Cass. Are you a Steel Song fan still?
Yeah, like I was so surprised to see him playing Steel Song. I was like, yes.
I know, and if he could have got all the way to the top, but he did a great show up. I mean, the fact that if you look, it was 2 other Steel Songs. Although the other Steel Song we'll cover next is, I don't even know if you can call it Steel Song. It's Steel. It's Steel and Amber doing stuff. But this one was a traditional by the book. We're singing, we're stealing, and we are tooting flutes. Were you surprised to see this one, Lindsey? I know this one really didn't change. I mean, there's 1 card different than last meta.
I mean, I understand what he was doing here. Seeing the Pride Rocks come down was my big like, oh, like I see what you're doing. Like, I think this plus the Ruby Amethyst's castles just going unchallenged almost all of Chicago was a big thing. People stopped teching for the locations, and Bivens played on that. I saw those Pride Rocks sticking to boards and just nobody being able to touch them. He went, I think, just with this a lot lower to the ground than Steel Song has in the past with the flutes and the Pride Rocks. Like, you don't see Big Cindy in here. There's no need to go that big. Just go fast. And watching his games was great. I know in the the Love to Lore Discord, the girls and the other marginalized genders, we had a chat where we were really rooting for Bivens. We loved the deck. We loved seeing him play. It was sad to hear that he lost out at the top 32, but I love the deck. I think there's still room for it.
I know, and I know, you're never supposed to, but I'm not a caster. I can be biased. I want Bivens to win with the Steel Song deck. I want it, so I can have bias. So, and he mentioned I was watching the Illumineers live stream earlier today, and he was saying that like Steel Song is rough, and as somebody who plays Steel Song, it is. There's so many paths to victory, but none of them are easy. Like you just have to like pick a path, stick to it. Sometimes with like ramp decks, especially anything with Ruby, once you get to turn 6, it's just keep destroying their stuff forever. And I feel like Steel Song is a lot of early game choices that make or break you for the rest of the game. Whatever you do those first 3 turns are going to really determine so much later.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's a pain. Love is pain with that deck. But the other one I mentioned that it was called the Concrete Jungle where dreams are made of. That is this deck, which when you guys see it on the screen, people who might not have seen it, it just the minute you get to the second card, you're like, I don't know what you're doing, and that's my favorite kind of deck, where you're just like, what is this? What you cooking? Yeah, I mean, this deck is truly unique, and I'm so excited to see something like this make the top 64. As somebody who likes detecting cards, was there anything about this deck that made you especially excited?
Yeah, I mean, I had been brewing a Steel Fossa deck as well. Definitely not as many songs as this deck was running, which I found interesting. Mostly the Strength of a Raging Fire was what caught me off guard a bit, where I was like, that's adding a lot of non-characters. But I mean, the deck just and I know I go into this a lot with Mufasa, even though it might not be in the greatest place. Mufasa has the best curve as far as value characters. Just always, we're always like R1, R2, R3, like they're big. If you don't deal with them, that's when we win. So there's just room for these, and the Gaston is just huge. Being able to skip to Big Tink on turn 4 without a shift is really good. So I'm glad I saw it get up there. It was in the same round as Bivens when it lost, which was sad to see both. But it was funny on the bracket. They would have played each other if they both won.
That would have
So
been the biggest heartbreak. I don't think I could have done it.
Right?
Turn off
Yeah.
and be like,
yeah. But no, it's fun to see. I loved the tech, and it honestly gave me a few ideas for my own lists.
a surprise for me was seeing that people were, and I don't know if you can call it teching in, but making sure to include the 2-drop evasive broom as Diablo repellent, which I thought was so fun. Would that ever be the case if Diablo wasn't so scary to people? I don't know. Maybe not, but
Depends on what other evasives are around.
it's true.
But I love that Steel Broom more than the 2-drop Jafar. Just a 2/3 stat line is just so much better.
Visually too, someone swatting away a bird with a broom, I like that more too. So because that is canonically how I fight birds in my house if that happened. So one thing I didn't notice, and did you, Cass or Lindsey, see any hyper aggro? I mean, one of the top 2 decks was what kind of aggro-ish, but hyper aggro, it's a dream. But does it come true?
The closest was the Emerald Amber, I think. They were doing the Under the Sea stuff.
Yes, let me pull that up. That one was a fun one, mostly because they did Sing
16.
Together. Yeah, and they called it Sing Together. They're like, guess what? I'm using Sing Together. This deck is called Sing Together. That's part of it. So that one, let me get that one here. Interesting stuff again. Yeah, like we have the Under the Sea Sing Together. We don't talk about Bruno, which is technically not, or no, I guess.
Well,
Can you sing that one?
Yeah,
together? No, you can't.
It's a bit more traditional aggro with the discard stuff in it. My favorite card that they put in here, I think we all forgot about it, but the Remember Who You Are, which
is it the You Have Forgotten Me?
You have forgotten me.
Yeah.
I
Oh.
always forget the line.
Ironic.
Again, we forgot. You have
It's true.
forgotten me. We have not played that card since set 1, and I saw 2 of them in there, and I was just like, yes. If you're gonna make them discard, make them discard.
I know.
Make
It's
them
painful.
discard everything. So yeah, I liked seeing that in the list.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see Prince John. Prince John, I personally have some interesting feelings about how Emerald seems to always have the most, I don't want to say overhyped, but certainly hyped to the moon kind of cards where people are like, this is the card that's going to ruin everything. And so I remember Prince John, like a week after Rise of the Flipborn came out, it was like $40. And it was a wonderful time for that card, but then nothing really came of it, which is really sad. But then you have the opposite now with Diablo, where
Yeah.
instead of the discarding, you're waiting for the person to draw.
To draw, yeah. I was gonna mention the Muses too. That's one of my favorite cards this set that I think people are sleeping on. I think more lists need to be running the Muses. They're so good. I've had games they're just bouncing everything back to your hand and nothing can stick to board. They're really good.
Bouncing is, if I had to pick between discard or bouncing, I like bouncing a little bit more because discard, you're making enemies, but bouncing, you're just frustrating them usually. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
So I was a big fan of the Genie bounce for a while. I haven't seen him in a bit, but so Cassie, you said you were playing Evasive. So are some of these cards ones that you were happy to see?
Yeah, well, I did play mostly Evasives the last set. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this one, especially since my sister's like, I'm gonna build an Emerald Ruby Evasive deck. I'm like, well, we can't be doing the same thing. Now I gotta do something different.
Exactly.
But yeah, I thought Prince John was gonna be like huge in Rise of the Floodborn, and now it's like, just kidding.
Well, him and Bucky, I always think end up being like really glorified items. Because once you get a Bucky and a Prince John out there, they're just there to sit there and look pretty, in my opinion. Like, it's very rare you get to do anything else with them other than be like, you sit here, be good.
Yep.
I need you to stay here. And so,
Yeah.
if something comes along with better value, then I think that makes it where it's like, well, I don't really need that man there to stand there and do nothing. Well, except I guess
Yeah.
let you draw cards.
Yeah, in the Bucky lists, Diablo definitely just straight up replaced Prince John, because now you can
Yeah.
hit a Floodborn on turn 3 instead of going Bucky and then Prince John, and then maybe turn 4 you're hitting a Floodborn
Yes.
that starts discard. With Bucky, you can start the discard right away and the card draw, and that's why Diablo is just so good.
Exactly. Yeah, it was so frustrating playing Prince John and be like, don't worry, I'll get there. And like you have like 2 turns where like nothing's happening. You're just praying no one wipes your board. With Ariel, turn 3 or turn 4, she can. So it was a lot of gambling, I
Yeah.
feel, in that deck.
Yeah. This deck with no Bucky, the Prince John, to me, makes a lot of sense. It's better for the Kerr.
Now we can't leave without talking, but we can't leave the bottom. I guess not the bottom. The bottom 60, is that the way they call it? But anyway, not the top 4. We have Mufasa's Revenge, which this one I found exciting because they worked in so many cards that are fun. The fact that we have Prince Eric the Homicidal Maniac, which is one of the favorite cards. I just love that he's like absolutely a kamikaze boat pilot. And Stitch Abomination. I mean, there's just so many surprises in here. This is one you picked, Lindsey. What are some of the cards that you were like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see you?
I mean, as a Mufasa player,
Well, true, yeah, Mufasa.
I love the list. It is not where I'm at with Mufasa. It's a bit different direction, I think. It's a little more evasive heavy, which I do think is pretty interesting. Given Diablos are around. I like that they're running the brawls. I'm running those in mine as my only non-character. It's Brawl the Bird is just what you do for Diablo. There's no other good solution in this. I love the Prince Erics. I've been moving closer to Prince Eric as well. I think he's strong. The Peter Pan is what caught me most off guard. Both Peter Pans that they're running. They're running the Shift and they're running the 1/3 Rush.
Yes. With no Tinkerbell, right?
Yeah, the 3 slot is just so tight in the deck because we've got Julietta's. We usually want Gastons or Docs. They didn't run either. And then Sisu's are on 3. Like 3 is just so tight. but I find it interesting that they're not going for the character ramp and they're just going for big board presence and lore. So a little more aggro, I think.
Yeah, the revenge is right because it's I would consider this a pretty violent day. A lot of people doing a lot of aggressive things.
Mm-hmm.
And Surfer Stitch. I'm always so excited when he's there because it's one of those cards. Turn 7. Are you gonna have enough characters out there to even get value of a Surfer Stitch?
I think in Mufasa, we're about the only ones still running Stitch, and I
Yeah.
don't know a single Mufasa deck that's not running at least 3. It's such good card draw when we get there, because we struggle with card draw being in
Yes.
Amber. And honestly, it's one of my favorite hits off Mufasa, especially if I do still have a board. Hitting that Surfer Stitch, and it's like, oh, now I get to draw 2, and here's a 4/8 that you're not going to be able to deal with.
Definitely. Were there any cards in this deck, Cax, that you were kind of like, whoa?
I'm always happy to see Lady Tremaine, but that's one I always have in my deck. Her and Madame Medusa. You got to have the ladies in red, so that's just my bias, I think.
It's true. I see her kind of, she falls out of favor. I mean, I always wonder if the designers knew when they made Madame Medusa she was going to be, someone had to have known, right? That she was going to be like part of the meta breaker because like
Yeah.
she's just a super rare. She's not that like jazzy, but then inadvertently she became one of the most powerful cards in the game.
I think her and Bucky are the two most complained about cards.
Yeah, right.
We might see something happen there.
I
don't know.
know. Part of me is like, do we want to talk about bans? But as a former Magic player, I'm too afraid of bans because I'm like, please, it hurts. It hurts when something you care
I
about
know.
becomes illegal, especially if
I
you
know.
spent money on it.
Yeah.
And,
I agree.
I mean, to that point, I mean, we look at this. I mean, there's one more list that I haven't pulled up yet. And that is this blue steel, which I know it's not legally called blue steel, but if for Zoolander fans it is. I mean, it's a healthy meta in the sense that I mean we aren't just C. I mean, you know, Rise of the Floodborn made people almost be like, it's over, this game, it's just Ruby, Amethyst, and that's it. And I think you look at decks like this, and it's yes, there are cards that are arguably stronger and sometimes stronger than I think anyone could have intended them to be. But there's no unanswerable cards by any means. This deck was fun only because I'm being nice, because I have to say something nice about Sapphire so people think I'm not biased. But traditionally, I think Sapphire is the worst color of all of Disney Lorcana. That's only because why does any human need that many ink?
Right.
No one knows. Science doesn't know.
Not a ramped fan, I see.
No. There's, oh my gosh, you just like look at your opponent and they're like, well, I have 40 cards in hand and 30 cards in my inkwell. And I'm like, okay, well, that seems like a little much.
That is excessive.
But it is.
They just have all the answers.
Yes, right. They're like, but the answer is you lose. I'm like, that's fair. That does seem to be about right. But it is exciting seeing Tamatoa actually getting to do what he's meant to do. You could tell like the first 2 sets, he needed treasure, and he didn't have enough treasure. And now I think there's enough where he actually is a pretty formidable foe.
Yeah. And I mean, I was glad to see Steel Sapphire because they, of all the decks out there, they are putting Bucky down. They are putting Bucky in his place. They can draw and have every answer to Bucky imaginable. And I love to see it because I think Steel Sapphire coming back into favor is what is making the meta healthier. As much as some people might hate ramp, this deck is a very necessary evil right now.
Yeah, right. I mean, people hate Be Prepared, but without Be Prepared, I mean, there's a balance to all. And I mean, obviously, every TCG has moments where like it's broken. But I don't think this is one of those moments. Looking at these results right now.
Yeah. I agree. And so this was the highest Steel Sapphire, I believe. This was the Decandia one.
Yeah, top 8.
Yep. And I was surprised to still see Scuttle. I think a lot of people are dropping Scuttle just because there's not quite enough items that you're getting value. But hopefully he got some good value out of it. My favorite card in this list, though, because of how many locations we saw over the weekend just dominate, he was running Rise of the Titans. And I think after Chicago, when we get to Fort Worth and set champs, every Steel deck is going to be running at least 1 or 2 Rise of the Titans because those castles
They're a
running.
problem.
They were running rampant.
I think any person who's been in a tournament, I think this has happened to more than just myself. But I had a turn where I saw one castle come out. I'm like, okay, one castle, I can deal with that. And the next turn they played a second castle. I was like, well, I scooped. This is like, what do you do? Because I don't have enough time for this.
Yep.
I always think it's funny that McDuck Manor had a moment of no one could have looked at that card and been like, that's a very powerful card. But man, that card can mess you up if you're not ready. So
Yeah.
I didn't see it a lot in these decks, which maybe it means it's gone forever. And if so,
Mm,
goodbye, because I don't
in
like that.
the Twitch of there was one game. I think it was one of the ones Kurt was playing. He was playing Ruby Amethyst, and he was against a Sapphire. I think Ruby might have been Steel, but they were playing McDucks, and there was like McDucks and castles on the
Oh,
board, and they were
God.
trying to remove each other's. It was a lore rush, for sure.
It turns into the game Monopoly, where suddenly it's like it's just locations where we have no characters.
But yeah, I also think McDuck Manor is going to come back into favor as we move towards set champs in Fort Worth. I think people just see that locations aren't being dealt with easily, so we're going to shove them in.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. I mean, that's why in my deck, I went back and forth. I mean, gosh, I know sideboard's such a hot topic because people say, well, with 60 cards and things are inkable, there really is no argument for a sideboard. But I think Rise of the Titan is it's fine. It's sideboard, just only let me a sideboard in that card because that's that one where it's like if I don't need it, it is basically useless. But if I need it, oh my gosh, I need it so bad.
It is inkable at least, so
That's
I think
true.
that saves it. Yeah, it's like sideboard in the deck. If you're not playing against the deck with items or locations, it's just ink. Yeah.
One thing to ask you too, before we go into the top four, are you someone that subscribes to the fact that if your deck does not have exactly 60 cards, you're like, it's unplayable? 61 cards, not playable. 60 is the only one.
As a Mufasa player, I am so like mid-range tempo that I personally cannot go over 60 because I want to make sure I'm getting what I need when I need it. But when we look back at like set one, when Ruby the Amethyst was such a heavier control deck, they were playing over 6 because I mean they were trying to fight against Steel Song, who was actually trying to sometimes wheel them out because of all their draw. So they would, I think some of them are running about 64 cards in set one that were winning the 1Ks.
Yeah.
So there's room for it if you have the draw engine for it. I think some of the Ruby Sapphires maybe could push it with their Hiram engine, but
Yeah.
again, you're then lowering that chance of making sure you draw a Hiram in your first 4 turns. So
Yeah.
there's some math to it, I think.
With the rise of the tutor, I say rise of the tutor. We have one, and it's Alma, and she's a tutor for just her family members. I'm like, well, maybe, but who knows? Cass, do you have any strong superstitions or beliefs? Because mine just goes on superstition. Math, who knows her? I don't, but superstition wise, I feel like I must.
I mean, I'm not gonna like play the 99 puppies, but
That's true. Yeah.
I think it's okay if you go a few over, but I wouldn't want to go too crazy because then you're kind of screwing yourself over with pulling what you want. You know, you're just adding
Exactly.
in more and more to keep track of.
Which that hybrid control deck that we were looking at earlier, I had something that I saw my friend Justin, he teched in a Chernobog as mill protection, like, which I think is very interesting to see. And I wonder if more people, I know mill is always on the horizon. Ever since there's been a whole new world, there's always been the thought of milling, but Chernobog, he's there. He's
Yeah.
ready to protect you.
Yeah, we're still running one in all the Mufasa decks. So
Yeah.
that's why it's so nice against discard, or now that Steel Sapphires. I had a game against Steel Sapphire a couple weeks ago in League, and they wheeled me straight into Chernobog, and I was just so happy to just be like, here's a 9/9, and they lost.
Oh, I think the worst thing I've ever felt, it was good and bad. I'm one of those people where if I do something really cheap, but I have to do it, I feel bad about it. And somebody did that. He's like, here's my Chernobog. And I had World's Greatest Criminal Mind. I'm like, I am so sorry that I'm using Cinderella to kill Chernobog because it just feels bad. But you got to do it. I said,
I
I'm not
love
here to
that.
make friends. So now we're moving into the final four. So the final four, there's things that we're used to seeing, and that would be the fourth place deck. So the fourth place deck is, you know them, you love them. It's Ruby Amethyst. But it had that spice of Flynn Rider frenemy, which I thought was quite exciting. And Sisu, which I was hoping one of you could explain to me. I mean, we all know why Big Bad Sisu's good. Why is Little Sisu good? Because she seems like such a gamble. Um, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Why is she so good?
Yeah, so this is a deck I've actually been playing. I actually just got back from League today, playing a list very similarly. So it's because of Flynn a lot. I mean the curve, if you can hit Flynn Rider on 2 and then that Sisu on 3, that Sisu's power or strength is equal to your opponent's hand size. She is going to have the highest strength on the board
That's true, yeah.
on your next turn. So she basically guarantees Flynn gets you that 3 lore unless your opponent has an answer. It just really puts on a lot of pressure. Plus, the 2 lore is nice on Sisu, and she can sing friends.
Yeah.
There's just a lot going for her. Like if you're not hitting, like Kuzco and then Madame Mim, like Flynn and Sisu is just a more aggro route to go and can get under the item decks a lot.
That's
And
a good point.
yeah, what I've liked about where Ruby Amethyst is now compared I was one of the people that hated it set 1. I did
That's
not
fair.
like the super control. The deck now is so fluid. Like you can aggro or you can play a little bit more of the mid-range game, and then you have those top-end control pieces in Maui, Medusas, Be Prepared. Like you can really control the board and draw if you need. The deck can change to what you need when you need it, and that's why I think it's just doing so well. It found a way under the item decks with Flynn, and now it's taking off again.
It's good that you pointed that out because yeah, I mean the top of the curve is be prepared. There's nothing after that. So it
Mm-hmm.
really is hoping to get that early game. I mean, look, the first 3 cards or 3 of the first 4 cards are truly just there to be like, I gotta get more cards in my hand, I gotta get friends. You're out racing that stupid little squirrel
Yeah,
and then
you
yeah,
have to you have to draw a card, an extra card every turn to stay ahead of Bucky.
yeah. Yeah, so I think it's very cool to see how this deck evolves. And I personally, like you said, set 1, it could be so brutal. You'd get to turn
Mm-hmm.
7 and that's when they just start and you're just like, "Oh my gosh." You'd be at like 18 and they just slowly beat you down um physically and mentally. And I think this deck at least they're doing a lot early on, so it's not as painful of a match against the control deck.
Yeah,
Have you
it's one of my new favorites. If my Mufasa doesn't end up doing well in set champs, I have this Ruby Amethyst to fall back on that I think is a lot of fun.
I sh- I love how dependable Ruby Amethyst is too. It's one of those decks that, will it ever be the flashiest comboiest deck? I don't know. But it certainly is. It gets you there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I miss Elsa and Aladdin. I'll say that. That's my last little thing. Where'd you go? Come back. I'm sorry. This deck is one. The next one is the Ruby Sapphire. It's the one I hate to see because this deck can really hurt you. This is speaking of like the early game versus the late game. This is one where it does nothing, and then all of a sudden it just destroys you. So it's the opposite of the other deck, in my opinion.
It's the new Icy Sisu. It's interesting on this list to see the pivot. They've pivoted from the uninkable 3-cost Sisu to the inkable one, I think, to try to make sure they can contend Flynn's.
Mm.
Because again, that's how other decks have been getting under it. You see the 4 brawls. Everyone has to run 4 brawls now for Flynn's, for Diablos. But yeah, I think the only other thing I saw on this list that I was like, oh, that's cool, was the Great Stone Dragon.
Oh, I know.
It's basically just 2 more fish bones. It a little slower,
Yeah.
but it plays much better into mill deck, into
Yeah.
Bucky, like discard. Because now
Yeah.
you have that stuff in your discard to ink.
Yeah, I called it it's not a creative name. I'm like, it's free real estate because basically you just have this graveyard and you're like, it's just free ink over here. I played against somebody in that in sealed, and yeah, he was just making more and more ink. Now in sealed, not so hopeful because he had like 2 cards in hand, so not a lot to do with all this ink he was generating. But it is a cool little recycling bin for ink. Um, but yeah, I think this one, that ice block, that's another one where they're like, oh, it's just a comet, it's just a little ice block. What's the good? And it turns out it's a problem.
Ugh, I hate that ice block.
Exactly.
I'm not gonna lie. I've found my ways around Bucky decks. I cannot stand against the item control myself sometimes.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
They're long. If you don't get the win by, I mean, they can be prepared by like turn 4.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be prepared the whole time. Luckily, I mean, this one ran 3, so that's the exciting news for whoever played against this is, as long as you were prepared 3 times, then maybe, but then they're just going to top deck Maleficent, Madame Medusa, Maui, so it doesn't matter. It's terrible.
Yeah, yeah. They do have a long setup time, and that's what we gotta abuse, because Popsicle, 1 jump, and then Fishbone, you've got 3 turns to get a board presence before
Oh
they
my
start
gosh.
doing anything. So,
Semifinals, because I made it to the top 4 of set championships, and I was Steel Song, and they matched me against Ruby Sapphire, and I'm like, well, I scoop, because it's a heartbreaking deck. You get to like even 18, you're like, wow, I'm doing it, and then nope, it's over, and you're like, I guess I'll play a 2-drop Robin Hood. Is that something? So
yeah.
That
it's a
happened to me
heartbreaker,
at my
but
set championship too. I was at 19 against Ruby Sapphire, and I was like, "Well, it's done. It's fine."
So the next one is, I think, 40 brand. They call it Blurple, but no, Blurple's blue
No.
purple. This is Nurple. Nope, I'm not sure, but there's a cute name for it. Gurple.
Emerald.
Yeah, that's better. This is a fun deck. I mean, gosh, this deck will ruin your day, but it's a fun day to be ruined because it's just this. I think there's just the funniest little cards doing silly little stuff.
Mhm.
And I love to see silly cards doing silly stuff all the way to second place. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I was thrilled to see Emerald Amethyst in second, and like, yeah, it's we've got like Pegasus and Jacques and all these cute little guys, like, fantastic.
Yeah, and Jacques being a tech against Diablo, right? Like, isn't that
Yeah,
kind of what's going on there? Or is that because I know you
I
said that
believe
you're
so.
excited to see Jacques. What's the story there?
Oh, I was thrilled. It's just not I mean, it's a card I thought of at the beginning of the set a bit. It's got that really, like, a 1/4 stat line with 2 lore. That's already, like, good.
Yeah.
That's almost I know there's one in Amber that's, like, similar. There's like a piglet in Amber that's like a 3 cost 2/4 maybe with 2 lore, but this one having that ability, and it's still inkable. So good and very underrated, especially as a common. And yeah, if it could come down and force Diablo to have to run into something it doesn't want to, or it's basically like a mini John Silver that we
Yeah.
saw in set 1.
Yeah, an early
Um,
game reckless is something that's hard to get. I don't think, I mean,
yeah. Also, like, I'm sure they did this against like Ruby Amethyst, forcing the Flynn out, because Flynn's another one that you just hold back. He just sits there and generates lore. So forcing him to be reckless, making them have to sacrifice him into something can be really good. And then I was gonna say the 7 cost Ursula here, the Amethyst Ursula, the big Sea Witch Queen.
yes.
In game 3 of the finals, I was so happy to see it finally hit the board and watch it do work. I feel like it almost got him there, just not quite. But it did work, and I think he really showcased the card. And I've been trying to get my play set even before this, because I was like, this card's good. I don't think people are paying enough attention, and then it got second place. It's strong.
Yeah, this deck has a lot of different paths to mischief, and I think this kind of shows it's fun when there's like a finisher card like that because not every deck is going to have, a flashy ending, and I think this one is. Ta-da, we got there.
Yep.
So, we've been talking about it. We've been going around it. First place, you know him, you hate him, you love him. I don't know where you're at on him, but it's the squirrel and the bird together. There are some things to say about this deck. I will say that Aladdin does work, and it was brutal to see that Aladdin against Lucille is a pretty brutal beatdown for that one. But I was also very intrigued that there was a Flynn Rider on Biggest Van. That was one that I did not expect to see as the first place deck. Was there anything about this deck that stood out to you too?
So yeah, the Flynn Rider to me, I think, is what pushed this deck farther up to the top. I've been watching some chats around Discard, and there have been certain people that have been saying like Flynn Rider is where we should be. The deck itself, it has a good game plan of trying to make sure your opponent doesn't have the answers, but when you look at the characters, even though this is Emerald, which is usually an aggressive color, there's not a lot of lore going on. The Diablos, you play the early Robin Hood and then the Ursula on 2. They're all one lore. When you get up to the bigger stuff, you do have Robin Hood for 2, Beast for 2 if you're questing, but I think the deck where it struggles is closing out a game. If you wait too long, your opponent can try to draw into a comeback. Flynn is what fixes that. And I think that is what's the most important piece here is Flynn is such a finisher. And I think we got to see that a few times from this deck in the streams. Flynn coming down and just being such a presence.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, he's not the most popular card by any means, but in this case, he put in that final closer. I was surprised not to see the Flynn, the little baby Flynn that quest for 2. I was surprised he wasn't in here, but obviously it worked. First place. So, you never want to see a deck that someone says is destined to win, but I think this deck was different enough and interesting enough and played well enough where I think it's pretty exciting to see that, it's not an unstoppable deck, but it is a powerful deck. And both sides can be happy. It wasn't a top 4 of all Emerald Steel, but Emerald Steel did go home with the crown. So those are the big decks. I mean, now we're moving into set championships are coming up next month. And then around the same time, we have our Disney Lorcana Challenge Dallas. That's the next one, which in theory I'll be at. Oh, I'm scared. Maybe I'll just be there just for fun, just to take videos. But what are you guys hoping to see? Do you think there's going to be any big shifts after this where you're like, wow, now everyone's going to do this in response to what we saw? Or do you want to keep that secret? You can keep it secret if you want to.
I'm always so open with a lot of my deck building. Like as we get like a week or 2 away from set championships, I'll probably stop posting what I'm updating. But like I said, locations, people are going to start teching for it because we're seeing them more. You have to have your answers. I think Emerald Amethyst will start to see a resurgence. I'm hoping. I would love to see another deck in the mix since that got second place. That's my big hope. I guess it's just slightly more diverse. I know we're going to see a lot of Bucky since that one. So just make sure you're prepared for it, but don't tech too heavy for that and not focus on the locations coming from the castles,
Exactly. I know the castles, they'll ruin your day. If there's a squirrel in a castle, then it's over for me probably. But what about you, Cass? What are your big things as you move forward?
Right now, I'm just kind of curious to see what happens with Pixelborn, since that's kind of going away on us. Like, I don't know if people are going to be able to like prepare the way they used to, and I kind of want to see what happens there before I decide what the heck I'm doing. But I'm probably the worst person to ask. I just build weird decks because they're fun. So
a weird deck that you have fun with can sometimes really do well because, as we have seen, if you play a card and your opponent goes, "Can I see that card?" You've already done something to them mentally.
Yeah, the amount of times in the last set championship I would put Perdita down and then pull something out of my discard. They're like, wait, what? I thought it only did that on quest. And I'm like, no. On play and quest. After they've already prepared my board, I'm like, but here, let me bring it all back.
As you just throw Stitch at their face over and over. That's who looks getting thrown at my face. It's just Stitch Little Rocket. I'm like, please.
Yeah, no. That is what I was doing.
Yeah, right. You're like Smash, but it's a little baby and it's Stitch.
That little rocket did a lot of work for me. He was good.
Yeah. And it's interesting you brought up the Pixelborn part. I think that's kind of a good place to wrap up because I was mentioning to somebody else that I always thought of Pixelborn as a treadmill. Like in the sense that, most people who train for anything athletic, you're going to train with other people. You're going to go outside. You're going to do stimulations. But like Pixelborn, you're at home. You don't need any friends. You're just there and you're driving and driving and driving that. your practice. And so it is interesting. Somebody like me, oh God, I played Steel Song like 40 different variants, and I was looking at the different data of it, and now you have to work a lot harder and maybe get out a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet to get that same kind of feeling. But everybody's going through it at the same time, so I don't think that's the good news. The bad news is I'm gonna have to leave my house more. Or I know some people on this call have been doing something different. So what have you guys been doing that's not the verboten pixel?
Webcam games for me. I joined that Real Play network that I think it was B Squared and John T started. And yeah, I've been playing that. I've been trying to stream. I've been interested in getting into streaming since I used to do that for an old digital card game that died sadly. So Lorcana replaced it for me. I didn't want to stream Pixelborn. Like I love Pixelborn and I appreciate what it did, but I knew that there was some rocky copyright ground. So I was like, if I become a streamer, I want to, stay on Ravensburger's good graces. So opted out until we started this new thing, and now I'm starting to stream some webcam games, which has been fun. It's a little rocky of a start, but I'm enjoying it. It's good to play some other people. So I'm excited for Pixelborn's future that is now going to pivot to those webcam games, since I can probably partake in that.
Yeah, and I think it's for the people at home. Those games are so good. If you get a chance to watch somebody stream a game, it's kind of like getting free coaching in the sense that not everyone's going to talk through what they're doing, but you still get to see lines of play, people doing real life simulations that you're going to run into. So even if you're somebody who you're like, I want to do it, I'm scared, which that's me. I want to do it, I'm scared. Still get into it in the sense as a spectator, and then it might make you be like, okay, I'm kind of shouldn't be afraid of my face being on the internet as it is right now. But also, watch. You learn a lot. It's kind of crazy how much you get tunnel vision on certain cards and lines of play, and that can help a lot. The only other thing I saw, you guys made your own private Discord or not private Discord, but you're having your own chat, was is there room to be improved in the Twitch comment section? From what I could tell, I wasn't in there on purpose, but I saw a lot of people going, you know what? I have better ways to spend my time.
There's I don't think there's a good answer. They were moderating as best they could.
Yeah.
I mean, we did see somebody get pretty swiftly banned for that, but they're still just Twitch is it's good to understand. Twitch is like Facebook for me.
Yes,
It is just
right.
it is a whole other ball game. It does not represent the majority of the community. It's a lot more of this vocal minority of, I'm trying to think of a better word for it, but I just want to say like edgy kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting mention Facebook because it's people saying things like, I heard someone say they're talking about too much Disney, and I'm like, that is not an accurate take. Sometimes people have opinions. That's a wrong one, unfortunately. So things like that were loudly incorrect. One of the reasons I started this channel, and I love the groups that you guys are in on Discord, is because things are better than they've ever been for women in TCGs, but there's still some room for improvement. So I think if anyone's ever thinking like, why, I think it's fine. Just hang out in a Twitch chat for a few minutes. Freaking tournament. You might be like, I think I see why women can get frustrated or why non-binary and other voices can go, this isn't my favorite place I've been. So, but the good news is Ravensburger cares. I think that's the most encouraging thing is people like Rochelle, when you say like, this is hard, they listen. So that's always been very encouraging. And it's encouraging to see, I think they said they had a pretty good turnout of women at the DLC so far. So, baby steps, and we're getting there. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending your evening with me. I know there's a ton to talk about, so I know in the comments people can say, you're wrong, you're right. But if you do it, be nice, because my feelings get hurt. But otherwise, Lindsey, where can people find, follow, and interact with you?
Yeah, so I go by Illumineer Linz, Lindz. I'm on Twitch, obviously. That's where I've started streaming. Gonna try and do at least once a week. I'm in a million different Discords, the HQ, the official one, and then I'm also on Twitter for as far as Lorcana most often, chatting on there, talking about stuff.
Awesome.
So yeah, you can find me there.
Awesome. And make sure to follow her because you will see so many decks you go, huh, why didn't I think of that? And she did. So that's the good news.
I cannot promise they're all good decks.
Yeah, but so that we can go, huh? And that's something. So, all right. And Cass, where can people find, follow, or watch your content?
So I am IllumineerCass on Twitter and on Discord. On Instagram, it's Illumineer.Cass. I'm very creative. But mostly, yeah, I make bracelets and random decks and sometimes cosplays.
Perfect. I know. I saw Ursula is brewing, so she's returning a third time, perhaps. Well, thank you again so much for spending time with us today. Thank you. I mean, this is probably the first episode that's going to come out, so that's really important to me, and I'm just so excited that you guys put up with it. I can't wait to edit this and find out how my computer works. And thank you to our listeners for hanging out with us today. I'm always happy to have you stop by on your quest. And remember, if you don't know where to find us, just take the second star to the right exit and head straight on till morning.